Hello, I'm Michael Lunzer, CEO and co-founder of Vitality Health. We're a company that helps payers streamline and automate their prior authorization processes. I'm here to talk to you today about what you didn't know now that we know from 2027. So this is kind of a back to the future theme, and my marketing department wanted me to wear a white wig, but this is about as far as I would go. That's my face on Doc Brown there. So the agenda for today is really to help maybe look back at what some of the assumptions and perceptions are around the CMS 0057 API requirement. Look on the bright side. What are some of the opportunities with CMS 0057 that can present real solutions to meaningful problems? And then also, what's the successful path? What's the best way to move forward with those APIs, and how do we implement those in a way that solves money and makes things saves money and makes things more efficient? So I'm going to start with some of those perceptions that people have and had around these APIs. But before I do that, I just want to mention essentially the three APIs that we're talking about are the Coverage Requirements Discovery API, which payers are required to have in place by the end of 2026. The first of those APIs is CRD, which is the Coverage Requirement Discovery transaction, essentially helping the provider to know, does it require a prior authorization? The next API is Documents, Templates, and Rules, or DTR, and that helps the provider to know what are the rules around the particular procedure and patient that we're dealing with. And then last is the PAS, or Prior Authorization Support API, which essentially helps the provider to submit a prior authorization and all the documents and attachments in a way that should accelerate the pace of a decision. Ultimately, we're all targeting a real-time solution, but how do we get there? So the first thing that happened as this interoperability plan came out is people looked at this and saw all the different boxes and thought, this really looks like it's going to be complicated. Then they thought, well, why don't we just look at our vendor? They're the ones who are taking in cases and helping to move those cases around. Surely they're going to be able to support this problem. Then they read in these documents that define the requirements for these interfaces that there's this thing called a Smart on Fire app. And its role in some way is to help interface the provider's EMR system to the payer's systems. And so there's a lot of confusion around what are these Smart on Fire apps, and am I going to need one if I'm a payer? Do I pick one, and does my provider have to use mine? What does that mean? Another thing that happened when this prior authorization requirement came out, it was January of 2024, and everybody on the payer world said, we have plenty of time. And then they said, because now we're a year later, most of them haven't really done anything. So how are we going to move forward? And the next assumption is, well, we'll just use AI, right? We've got to just be able to point AI at two different systems, and it should just magically work. Well, obviously that's not the answer. So let's talk about some of the specific things that need to be done and some of the opportunities that come from this process. So first I'd like to talk about some of the problems in the prior auth process. So on the bottom you have kind of the workflow from a provider writing an order all the way through that order being approved. And on the payer side, one of the problems that occurs right away is they have these medical policies that they need to create. And those medical policies are 10-page, 20-page, sometimes 50-page documents that detail the requirements for a prior auth. And within those documents, they've got many different sections and operational meaning to them, but they're buried in a PDF document. The next thing that happens is the provider needs to know, does this service require a prior authorization? And usually that's supported by payers by providing spreadsheets on their public website. 4,000 row spreadsheets, which obviously are not the answer. And then, in most cases, those spreadsheets don't tell the provider what documents are required or which policy applies. And so in that scenario, providers submit what they think is needed and ultimately submit prior auths that are short on information. The effect of that is about 70% of overturned prior authorizations are because there was data missing in the submission. Another thing that happens often is providers are told through a web page that describes if you're submitting for musculoskeletal, submit the prior auth to Evacor at this link, or if you're submitting for mental health, click this link and submit it to Magellan. That's obviously not an appropriate process. And because of this pain in the front end of the process, we end up with providers that just hit the fax button, right? And so how do we solve this problem? And if we solve this problem, is that a good thing? So one of the great things about the CMS requirements is they require the payer to implement a prior auth rules database. So this takes that whole spreadsheet paradigm and moves it over to a transactional database. In a perfect world, that database includes information like, does it require a prior auth? What documents are required? What do I need to submit? Where do I submit it? All of the things that a provider would want to know. And then the next step in the process is that there's a prior auth medical policy database. And that database takes those medical policies that the payer needs to communicate to their providers and puts it in a format that can work with interoperability. And so the really exciting thing about this standard, we'll get into more of these details in a minute, but those same artifacts for the PA rules database and the medical policy database can be used in the CRD transaction for interoperability, but that same database can power the health plan's public website or their provider portal. So by being able to do double duty, that means that when a payer implements the right solution, they're able to get this value from not only the new specifications and the CMS APIs, but also on their web portal and improve their provider experience and throughput. Another opportunity, when we talked a bit about policies, medical policies at health plans, today they're usually published in Microsoft Word to start with, and there's a committee that reviews those policies and decides if they're appropriate. They validate the clinical criteria. Policies usually have kind of a standard format for history and criteria and all those types of things. And they're created in Microsoft Word, which is a pretty heavy burden. And then when there's an amendment, they're emailed to all the participants in the committee. They create updates, send it to one person who collates all those updates. When it's finally finalized, it's given to a marketing person who puts it onto the public website as a PDF. Obviously, it's really a manual process. Tracking versions and appropriate which version belongs on the website is really challenging. And now CMS is requiring a different structure. So what you really need is a policy management tool that is a content management application that helps all the way through the life cycle of creating and editing policies, managing approvals, deconstructing those policies into the right database elements all the way at the creation period. And then those versions, as they're released, have effective dates and end dates and become living documents in a system versus a PDF document. Another element of the CMS requirements are the ability to create questionnaires that are attached to a policy, that if a questionnaire is answered appropriate and the right documents are submitted, a prior auth can be automated for approval. These policy management tools can allow those questionnaires to be built and then validated and approved by the right medical directors. And now those are validated instruments that can be used alive in that DTR process. So another big opportunity in this CMS API world is that these APIs do not need to be delivered all at the same time. And as I've mentioned, each of these APIs and the functions and the services that support them bring unique value that can be realized without all the other pieces. So for instance, step one is putting all of the the rules, the prior authorization rules, into a database that can help answer the question, is an auth required? Again, giving the health plan a single source of truth for this information. If somebody wants a spreadsheet, it can be printed from that tool, but a spreadsheet's not the right place to manage this data. Similarly, step 2, so first of all, step 1, CRD, that can be implemented today in a portal or on the public website of the health plan, and now provider experience is dramatically improved. We found that about 30% of all prior authorizations disappear when the provider knows, does it require a prior auth? Because usually, if they're not sure, they're going to submit a prior auth. So by just giving them an accurate source of truth, we can eliminate 30% of all prior auths. That's just amazing when you think about how painful this entire process is, and it's so simple to eliminate 30% of this painful process. Secondly, policy management, when we implement that tool, we can then tell the provider when a prior auth is submitted, what to submit. So if you can imagine, 70% of prior auths that are ultimately denied and then overturned is because data is missing. So now we can eliminate that problem. The next step, auto authorization rules, helps to automate prior auth decisions. We have found that at one of our customers, step 1 eliminated 30% of all prior authorizations. Step 3 automated the decision around 51% of prior authorizations that were remaining after the 30% were eliminated. So really simple steps that are logical that bring a dramatic impact to this problem. And then last step, this is a spot where AI really does come into play. Once a prior authorization is submitted and it's put through all the filters and other systems to eliminate the easy to approve prior auths, now we can apply AI and help a clinical decision maker make a decision. It's not a probability-based decision. AI is used to help that provider resource look at the medical policy, compare it to the medical record, and find the evidence. So it's a way to present a very documented, well-documented decision process. Another big opportunity is that in this specification for prior authorization, it talks about questionnaires a lot. And a lot of people talk about these questionnaires as kind of the magic of this specification that's going to make prior authorization approvals immediate. Well, there's a key component of that questionnaire discussion that's really important. First of all, the payer does not need to completely refactor their policies into detailed clinical questionnaires. They can, in that questionnaire, ask for documents. So if you can imagine, we've talked to some payers that have 600 medical policies. Those medical policies all have a criteria matrix that helps them make a decision if a prior auth should be approved or not. Converting those matrix or those criteria into a questionnaire is a pretty significant task. We've had one payer that said, if I have to do that and validate all of those questionnaires, it could take me 5 years. And so that's one of the reasons health plans get really nervous about this specification. The reality is they don't have to completely convert their questionnaires, their criteria into questionnaires. They can just suggest that what's needed is a basic questionnaire with some clinical information and the required documents that need to be submitted. And by doing that, they've done a couple of things. First of all, they've made the process work for the current people that fill out prior authorizations. The administrators at the providers, they can answer those simple questionnaires and they can attach documents. The specification says that those questionnaires should be able to immediately capture all the data from the provider system, but we know that's going to take time. And the last thing we want to do is present a complex clinical questionnaire, to the provider and have the administrator at the provider turn that questionnaire over to the doctor. Now instead of burden reduction for the provider, we've added new burden. So again, this two-phased implementation of questionnaires where the first phase is much more clinical and the second phase is more high level, the first phase is not very clinical and allows required documents. The second phase gets much deeper into the clinical questionnaire and allows the systems to interoperate more efficiently. So the other thing that people again asked at the beginning is, what can I use AI for? How can I speed this up? A lot of people said, well, we can take those PDFs of medical policies, run them through AI, and dynamically present the questionnaire, which, if it worked, would be wonderful. But we all know medical directors from health plans, and they're not going to trust some AI tool to present a validated questionnaire that comes from their criteria. So it does make sense that you can use AI to convert into a questionnaire, but it still needs to be in the context of a policy management tool that looks at that data and allows somebody to approve the actual questionnaire and validate it. And that's going to take some time. On the other side, AI can be used really well for comparing the clinical requirements and the documents, the medical record of the patient, but they shouldn't be used to make decisions. We found a lot of cases lately where government has found that to be a big problem if AI is making decisions. So it can surface that information and show a clinical reviewer what the details are in the medical record that meet the requirements, but they shouldn't be making decisions. So I'd like to just talk about some of the keys to implementing these APIs in an efficient structure. The first step is find a way to convert those spreadsheets into a PA rules database and convert those PDF documents into a medical policy database. A couple of keys to the systems that you should select is, first of all, you have to select a rule system or is-auth required and a policy system for DTR. You want to make sure that what you select also can support the web so that you're not just building this for the APIs, you're building this as a universal repository. And secondly, those systems also do need to support those API interfaces. So this is the Itility Health vision for what we do. We have a product called PA Checkpoint Database that imports the spreadsheets, also takes in all the variables by group and carve out and extra rules that are ultimately very complex and present a very simple answer, yes or no, prior auth is required, here's the policy about that, and here are the rules of what you need to submit. And then policy management database, I talked about that a little bit. It's a content management tool that lets the payer build and maintain their policies, but also presents that transparency so that even if you've ever gone to a payer's website to look for a policy, usually you get a simple search bar. Type in the policy you want to find, and we'll find it. 90% of the time you'll get an answer back that's like a Google search, right? Multiple pages of multiple documents. So you want a policy database that's going to power that same website interface to allow the provider to enter the CPT code, the effective date, what the topic is, other keywords, and that finds the exact policy rather than having to search for it. The Smart on Fire question is really important. Smart on Fire apps were designed and built into the specification for prior auth APIs back when we knew it was going to take a long time for EMR systems to comply, and also as a way to make it easy for people that build systems for payers to test their systems. But ultimately, as a provider, I'm not going to want to load 3 different Smart on Fire apps for each different payer that I work with. I'm going to need a single Smart on Fire app, or the provider's going to want an EHR that actually natively supports those interfaces. So as a payer, you don't need to find a Smart on Fire app to give to your providers. That's really their responsibility, and they want to be able to make that choice. Imagine if you had to look for weather for 3 different states, and each state needed a different app. That's kind of what the Smart on Fire app concept looks like in this picture. It's just not logical. So another component of that successful path We talked about this before. It's following a phased approach to prior auth implementation. It limits your risks. It gives you value at each step. And it spreads out those implementation requirements so that you can actually absorb those within a reasonable amount of effort. So another really strong key to implementing these tools effectively is work with someone that has already been to the future, somebody that's built these things and has implemented these for others. That will help you ensure that you're not buying next year's product, you're buying a product that's tried and true. And now we're into my commercial for Itility Health. First of all, we have solutions that support all of these different interfaces, both a PA checkpoint database for prior auth rules, policy management database for the policies, and that policy system, by the way, also supports MCG and interqual policies interleaved into the DTR response. And then there's auto authorization, which makes decisions instantly based upon structured information, and clinical assistant, which is an AI-powered tool that helps the payer make decisions around prior auth submissions. Itility Health has multiple existing customers. Oh, look at that, they took away my slides already. I'll cut to the chase here. I've got 5 example customer logos: Blue Cross North Dakota, Blue Cross Blue Shield Minnesota, Blue Cross Blue Shield Wyoming, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, and Parkland Health Plan, and then numerous other non-Blues that are customers that have been using these tools for the last 5 years. So really tried and true tools, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. It's we're happy to answer specific questions after the session here, as well as we have a booth at booth 670 in the main hall, and would love to have you stop in and visit. Any questions that I can answer quickly? I know we're up against the end of the time here. All right, thank you very much.